One of the most profound, unforgivable sins of human civilization is our terrifying capacity to ignore the devastating wake of our own progress. In our relentless, insatiable pursuit of wealth, energy, and industrial supremacy, we aggressively rip into the ancient belly of the earth. We hollow out the ground beneath our feet, extracting the rich, dark resources that power our glowing cities and fuel our towering empires. But the earth demands a toll for its stolen treasures. It leaves behind a massive toxic residue of dead rock, worthless sludge, and suffocating dust. And with a staggering, almost godlike arrogance, we take this dead, toxic refuse and we pile it high into the sky. We build our own artificial synthetic mountains out of waste, casting long, pitch-black shadows over the very homes of the people who dug it out. We treat gravity and geology as mere suggestions, firmly believing that our man-made mountains of debris will sit silently forever. We ignore the dark looming threat suspended directly above our heads until the earth can no longer bear the unnatural, suffocating weight, until the day the Black Mountain finally breaks and violently crashes back down upon its creators. This is the harrowing, heartbreaking chronicle of a town that was buried alive by its own livelihood. This is the tragic, infuriating story of the Aberfan disaster. The year was 1966. The location was the deep, notoriously foggy and damp valleys of South Wales. Nestled tightly between the steep, green, rain-soaked mountains lay the small, fiercely close-knit and deeply proud village of Aberfan. It was a quintessential British working-class community, a town of narrow, winding cobblestone streets, tightly packed terraced brick houses, and thick, gray morning mist. But the true beating heart of Aberfan was entirely subterranean. The town existed for one singular, exhausting purpose: coal. For generations, the fathers, brothers, and sons of the village descended daily into the claustrophobic, pitch-black depths of the Merthyr Vale colliery. They swung their heavy iron pickaxes in the suffocating dark, inhaling the sharp, toxic coal dust, sacrificing their lungs and their bodies to feed their families. It was a grueling, unforgiving existence, but it was an honorable one. The black stone put warm food on their wooden tables. However, this relentless underground industry had left a massive, terrifying, and deeply unnatural scar on the lush green landscape above. Looming ominously on the steep, rain-slicked mountain slopes directly above the village were colossal, terrifying mountains of pitch-black mining waste. They were known locally and deceptively simply as spoil tips. For over half a century, the powerful, highly bureaucratic, and deeply arrogant National Coal Board of Britain had ruthlessly used the mountain as a dumping ground. Every single day, heavy tramways and metal buckets carried the worthless toxic byproduct of the mines, crushed shale, clay, and fine coal dust high up the ridge. They dumped it aggressively onto the slopes, building massive, unstable black pyramids that stared directly down at the local schools and homes. The most recent, and by far the most terrifying of these artificial mountains, was designated as Tip Number 7. Begun in 1958, Tip Number 7 had grown to a monstrous, incomprehensible height of 34 meters, roughly the size of an 11-story building. It contained nearly 300,000 cubic yards of loose, unstable, highly porous mining slag, and it was situated in an incredibly precarious, historically negligent, and fundamentally fatal location. To save time and money, the National Coal Board had arrogantly chosen to build Tip Number 7 directly on top of a highly active, natural underground water spring. It was an act of pure, unfiltered engineering madness. The base of the massive Black Mountain was constantly, secretly being eroded and lubricated by the flowing water beneath the soil. The villagers of Aberfan were not blind. They were intimately familiar with the moods and dangers of the mountain. For years, the mothers of the village, the local town council, and the school headmasters had raised desperate, frantic alarms. They wrote urgent, fearful letters to the authorities, explicitly warning them that the Black Mountain was visibly shifting towards the village below. They lived in a constant, paralyzing fear that the massive pile of toxic waste would one day collapse onto their homes. But the National Coal Board, seated safely in their pristine, dry offices in London, callously and arrogantly waved away the concerns. They prioritized their profit margins and their daily extraction quotas over the lives of the working-class families in the valley. They confidently, foolishly assured the terrified mothers that the tips were strictly monitored and absolutely, entirely safe. They lied, and nature was about to expose that lie with apocalyptic fury. The month of October in 1966 brought unusually severe, relentless, and aggressive weather to the valleys of South Wales. For 3 solid weeks, a heavy, torrential, freezing rain battered the mountainside without a single moment of mercy. The constant, aggressive deluge pounded the surface of tip number 7, soaking the loose, porous coal dust and the brittle shale. Simultaneously, the hidden underground spring beneath the tip swelled violently from the rainwater, pumping thousands of gallons of liquid upward into the belly of the waste pile. The Black Mountain was drinking the water. It was becoming heavily saturated, fundamentally altering its physical state. The loose, dry mining waste was rapidly, silently transforming into a highly unstable, densely pressurized, semi-liquid slurry. It was a ticking biological time bomb of black mud, holding millions of tons of weight against a steep, slippery incline. Friday, October 21st, 1966. The morning dawned cold, damp and cloaked in an incredibly thick, oppressive gray mist that limited visibility to mere meters. In the valley below, it was the last day of school before the highly anticipated half-term holiday. At exactly 9 a.m., the cheerful, innocent children of the Pantglas Junior School excitedly filed into their warm classrooms. They took their seats at their small wooden desks, hanging up their damp coats, and joyfully sang their morning assembly prayers. It was a picture of absolute, pure innocence, completely unaware of the massive liquid leviathan waking up in the fog above them. High on the mountain ridge, at 9:15 a.m., the fragile, waterlogged heart of tip number 7 finally catastrophically shattered. The massive, oversaturated black pile simply liquefied. It lost all structural integrity in a fraction of a second. A colossal, unimaginable mass of thick, heavy, pitch-black coal mud, weighing a mind-numbing 150,000 tons, violently detached from the mountain. The black avalanche accelerated into a terrifying, unstoppable freefall, plunging down the steep gradient toward the sleeping village. It was not a landslide of rocks. It was a devastating, churning, liquid mega-tsunami of dense, suffocating black sludge. As it fell, it gathered a horrifying, terrifying speed, racing down the mountain at over 80 kilometers per hour. The sheer, violent friction of the massive black wave aggressively compressed the air in front of it. It created a deafening, terrifying, apocalyptic roar that echoed through the foggy valley. Witnesses who survived described the sound as an aggressive, screaming jet engine flying just inches above their heads in the thick fog. Down in the village, the children inside the Pantglas Junior School heard the terrifying roar echoing off the brick walls. They looked toward the large glass windows, trying to pierce the thick morning mist, wondering what the monster could possibly be. They never even had the time to stand up from their wooden desks. The 150,000-ton tsunami of freezing, black liquid coal violently, aggressively, slammed directly into the back wall of the school. The kinetic impact was absolute, apocalyptic, and merciless. The thick brick walls of the classrooms violently exploded inward like paper under the crushing, unimaginable pressure. The large glass windows shattered into a million flying shards, instantly followed by an impenetrable, towering wall of pitch-black mud. To understand the sheer, paralyzing horror of that exact second is to understand the ultimate, purest form of claustrophobia. This was not a flood of water that you could swim through or float upon. This was a dense, heavy, suffocating, gelatinous slurry of crushed rock and fine coal dust that behaved like wet concrete. It violently flooded the classrooms in a matter of milliseconds, rising from the floor to the ceiling, instantly extinguishing all the lights and the morning sun. It aggressively consumed the desks, the chalkboards, the toys, and the terrified children sitting in their chairs. The black mud aggressively filled their mouths, their noses, and their fragile, expanding lungs, instantly cutting off all oxygen. They were buried alive, physically crushed, and violently suffocated in the pitch-black freezing dark. Before they could even comprehend the disaster, the massive black wave continued its path of destruction, swallowing several neighboring farmhouses and terraced streets before finally, shudderingly coming to a halt. The deafening, jet-like roar of the avalanche was instantly, abruptly, replaced by a terrifying, heavy, deeply unsettling silence. The thick gray mist hung over the valley, but the Pantglas Junior School was completely gone, swallowed entirely beneath a massive, steaming black desert of coal. And then, the silence was violently shattered by the agonizing, heartbroken screams of the mothers in the village. Word of the catastrophe spread through the town like wildfire, instantly reaching the deep, dark tunnels of the colliery below the earth. The hardened, soot-covered coal miners, realizing that their own children were buried beneath the waste of their labor, immediately dropped their tools. They rushed frantically to the surface, their faces black with dust, and ran aggressively up the hill toward the ruined school. What followed was one of the most desperate, heartbreaking, and agonizing rescue operations in human history. Hundreds of desperate miners, fathers, police officers, and villagers descended upon the massive black mountain of mud. They had no heavy machinery at first. They used regular iron shovels, garden spades, and eventually, their own bare bleeding hands. They dug frantically, aggressively tearing into the thick, black freezing sludge, screaming the names of their sons and daughters into the fog. But the physical nature of the coal slurry was incredibly, devastatingly cruel. Because the water had drained away upon impact, the thick, heavy mud rapidly began to solidify. Within mere minutes, the suffocating black sludge hardened into a dense, impenetrable mass, mimicking the absolute strength of set concrete. The desperate fathers found their shovels bouncing off the hardened black earth. Their bare hands were torn and bleeding, unable to penetrate the tomb. They worked for hours, then days, under the cold, pouring rain, refusing to sleep, refusing to eat, refusing to surrender to the nightmare. The town fell into a deep, profound, and utterly suffocating state of communal shock. Every time a small, lifeless body was miraculously pulled from the hardened black mud, a haunting whistle would blow across the valley. The entire crowd of hundreds of frantic digging men would instantly fall completely, terrifyingly silent. They stood perfectly still in the rain, hoping against all rational hope to hear the faint, muffled cry of a child from beneath the earth. But the silence was absolute. The earth had claimed its terrifying toll, and it refused to give back the living. After the first few horrific hours, no one was pulled out alive. The rescue mission slowly, agonizingly, morphed into a grim, deeply depressing recovery operation. The final death toll was apocalyptic for the small, tight-knit community. 144 innocent people were violently suffocated and crushed beneath the black mud that Friday morning. 116 of those victims were children between the ages of 7 and 10. In a single, horrifying instant, nearly an entire generation of Aberfan's youth was surgically, brutally wiped from existence. The village was left hollowed out, a quiet, weeping ghost town burdened with an unimaginable, suffocating grief. But the tragedy of Aberfan was compounded by a sickening, deeply infuriating bureaucratic betrayal. In the highly publicized, tense government tribunals that followed the disaster, the executives of the National Coal Board desperately attempted to escape justice. Lord Robbins, the arrogant chairman of the board, cowardly attempted to blame the entirely predictable disaster on an unpredictable act of nature. He aggressively claimed that the hidden water springs beneath the mountain were a geological mystery that no human could have foreseen. It was an absolute, deliberate, and malicious lie. The maps, the local mothers, and the historical records had all explicitly pointed to the presence of the water and the shifting danger of the tip. The coal board absolutely refused to admit that their own insatiable greed, their blinding arrogance, and their deliberate negligence were the true, undeniable murderers. Shockingly, not a single executive from the National Coal Board was ever fired, demoted, or prosecuted for the massacre of 144 people. Furthermore, the traumatized, grieving parents of Aberfan were forced to endure a final sickening indignity. The government forced the impoverished village to use a portion of the charitable disaster relief fund to pay for the removal of the remaining dangerous spoil tips. The perpetrators of the disaster forced the victims to pay for the cleanup of the murder weapon. Today, the town of Aberfan still rests quietly in the misty valleys of South Wales. The terrifying, massive black pyramids of coal waste have long since been removed, replaced by gentle green hills that hide the deep scars of the past. On the exact site where the Pantglas Junior School once stood, a beautiful, quiet memorial garden now exists, a peaceful sanctuary dedicated to the stolen generation, a silent monument to the children who went to school and never came home. But beneath the green grass and the white stone memorials, the deep, agonizing pain of the tragedy remains deeply etched into the very soil of the valley. Aberfan stands as a stark, permanent, terrifying monument to the fatal limits of human arrogance and corporate greed. It reminds us that when we prioritize our industrial ambitions over the basic sanctity of human life, the earth will eventually, violently, return our waste back upon our heads. We cannot build towering monuments of toxic refuse and expect nature to remain a silent, obedient servant forever. History is a quiet, unforgiving, and absolutely impartial judge, and it remembers every single human mistake. You are watching Past Resurrected. Until the next age, remember, the Earth gives and the Earth takes away. History is not dead. It only waits, silently buried beneath the heavy black mud, waiting to be remembered.